Okay, so I'm going to be alternating on and off, and I'll give heads up as to what I do on being mostly Q&A or topics. Now, next week's kind of a combination of the two because I'm going to talk specifically about what I believe are disempowering beliefs. The problem with a disempowering belief, nobody thinks of them as a disempowering belief. They just think they are, but they're disempowering. Now, some disempowering beliefs are good, like I know I do not have the ability to fly without an airplane. So it's a disempowering belief that I don't jump off cliffs to try. That's a good thing. But when they're not true, they're disempowering. They're not good. It's disempowering. They stop you from doing things you want. So although I do want to have this be more of a Q&A, and you know me, I can always come up with something to talk about, but I would prefer it to be Q&A. I've written something and I've expanded on it, making it a little more accurate. I don't know, accurate's the right word, but eliminating things, I suppose. So I wanted to talk about this for 5 minutes to put it in the challenges we're having in context, okay? Because I think what we want to do is be investigating kind of where we are with things. And there's this book by Paul Pilzer, which may or may not be in print. It used to be out of print, but it looked like you could get some new ones. But people are always selling shelf copies, so he's has a new book called God Wants You to Be Rich, which I think is the same theme, just with some religious overtone of God there. Which actually, if he had titled it "The Great Spirit Wants You to Be Rich," it would totally fit my beliefs. I have no problem with somebody saying it's God that wants to do it. You label it how you want to label it, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody. And he talks about that there's what we do, which is this line here, and there's what's possible, and that this difference is called the technology gap. And he calls it technology gap because nowadays wealth is kind of equal to our resources times um, the technology we have raised to a certain power. So it goes up exponentially as we add more and more technology. It gets better and better. AI is about to blast this thing wide open. But it's been increasing for a long time. Even when the manifesto came out, there was a big gap. I mean, I just put that here as a time frame. We've gone past it. But the thing to realize is that one thing that holds it back is adoption of new ideas is inhibited by limiting beliefs. The agile community has I don't know, if I was to list limiting beliefs versus empowering beliefs, there'd be about the same number of them. It's really amazing. And when you talk about them, people say you're being negative, whereas I consider negatively talking about negative things can be a positive if it gets people to let go of them. Yes, I'm a math major, two negatives. And also I took organic chemistry, so I know, well, actually in organics, it's a little different. There's attraction of negative and positive. But anyway, too many puns, sorry. But there's also the agile industrial complex of all this certification stuff because we're not teaching the basic core stuff that we should be teaching. And it's really problematic. Uh, if you mean a social gap well, why don't you say what you mean by social gap? You can just chime in or throw it in the chat. I can imagine a lot of different things. So I think the answer is yes, but I'm not sure. Want to make sure I'm talking to you what you want to talk about. So when you want to, Frederick, jump in, raise your hands, come off mute, or just put it in the chat. What you mean by social gap? There are all kinds of gaps. Yeah. So technology gap is how we create wealth. In my mind, you could call it the agile ability gap. How we communicate is a gap. How we work together as companies is a gap. I hadn't really thought about it this way, but you're right. Everything's a gap. He was culture, knowledge. Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Totally. All of these are gaps. The reason technology, though, is a very interesting one is he's talking about wealth, and wealth has an impact on all of this. I got into Pilzer stuff back in the Bush era, and I remember why. There was a particular comment he made about the plastics. You know, plastic in the ocean is starting to be getting to be recognizes a problem. Nowadays, I think they think the plastic island sort of in the ocean is about the size of Texas. Okay, it wasn't that big back in the day. And I had read this book, and I remember thinking, Bush, and I'm not trying to get political, it's just the historical thing. He said this thing. He said, "Yeah, we know it's a problem, but we don't have the money to solve it." And I thought to myself, not putting on the environmental hat, which would say it really almost doesn't matter how much money, but ignore that. Well, wait a moment. Why don't we have the much money? If we actually could close the gap in how we build products, how we add value to people, all that, then we would have the money. I mean, we're losing hundreds of trillions of dollars by not developing products effectively, by having people work much less effectively. It's partly why people are going to overreact to AI, cut a lot of jobs because they don't see the value. They're going to do it in a bad way. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but it's going to happen. And all these people are talking about, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. Believe me, it's possible to do a lot of shitty things. If history has shown anything, both in the world and in management, it's that we are very capable of doing the wrong thing. So don't tell me it can't happen. All signs are there, it's going to happen. If you notice the people who say it's not going to happen or things like Agile's not dead, they're all the people who are defending, making their money on it. And by the way, I see the last 2, 3 weeks, I've seen at least 20 Agile is not dead posts, and I've not seen one Agile is dead. Nobody ever says Agile is dead. They just say it's stagnant, needs to get better. But anyway, when you defend it, you tend to overreact. But what's important here is that there's a gap between what's possible and what's manifested. And I put some of the things that I know are still almost entirely missing: systems thinking, minimum valuable increments, value stream analysis, lean management, test first, and I don't mean even full test first, diagnosis before prescription. Frameworks are preset solutions that people decide to adopt before they even know what's wrong in their system. And it's wrong to say that, I know Scrum says, well, we'll discover your things. You don't need to implement Scrum to see what your problems is. I can show you a team problem. Give me an hour conversation and I'll tell you what your problems are by asking you, and, maybe a day. It's certainly not a 2-day training. And what you think your problems are, that doesn't help you if you don't know how to solve them. So, there's also inherent simplicity. That's a theory. It's not a theory of constraints, but it comes from Ellie Goldratt. Physics of flow, lean theory of constraints, and first principles. Okay. So it's growing wider. And it occurred to me this morning, since this is a Q&A and I'm about to be quiet and looking for more questions, and you could ask about this as well. But it occurred to me that when you put our problems and our disempowering beliefs in the context of this, I think it helps create a path to go from this line to this line. And so now I'm going to let you guys ask questions on anything that's not political. Okay, sorry, one almost political thing. This can be pro or con Clinton, so I think it's not taking a side. Clinton for a long time had a lot of the economy was just amazingly booming. And I didn't see anybody say this. Somebody must have said it, but I didn't see it. It wasn't that widespread. These were the days when the distribution channel in the United States was being rocked by Amazon, when a lot of online sales were happening. Productivity was shooting through the roof because ineffective distribution and ineffective sales methods were being eliminated. And that was disruptive, obviously. But it just goes to point that if you can increase productivity, wealth goes up as well. And that's part of what he talks about in closing the gap. If we close the gap by raising this up here, what happens is you increase productivity, you increase your wealth. The other interesting thing, and I actually do this, see, I'm not really trying to raise this. See, real true innovation often comes from raising this, and that increases the gap, and that's harder to do. But what I found, if you try to close the gap, you actually raise this as well. And one last point, there's been some posts recently, just occurred to me. I haven't written this down, so I guess I kind of want it recorded. People are saying there's nothing new under the sun. And first of all, I disagree with that because there are a lot of things that I didn't know that didn't come out until the last 10, 20, 30 years. To say AI is not new because people do it is ridiculous. To say the internet's not new because we used to have libraries is ridiculous. If it's, I remember a story, Jeff McKenna told me. He was on the first Scrum team, worked with me for a few years. And he talked about, you go back in the day. So I go back in the day of punch cards. Okay. And literally, you had a deck of cards. That was your program. And if you were lucky, you'd get 2 or 3 runs of your program through in a day. I learned alcohol this way, by the way. It was pretty amazing. I'd go in the morning. I wasn't even on campus. I'd have to go from Emory on the east side of Atlanta to Georgia Tech in center Atlanta, Midtown, as it was called. And I would take the bus, and I'd get there early in the morning because I knew if I got there early in the morning and submitted my deck, by 5 in the afternoon, I'd get it back. And sometimes I got lucky and I got it back at 1 and I could get 3 whole passes of things. Well, you know what? The first time I did this, I remember it didn't compile. Boy, that was devastating. I get 1 or 2 shots a day and it didn't even compile. I was not happy. So you learn to be really careful when that happens. Okay, nowadays when you write a code, I mean, it's checking your syntax as you type. It tells you what function you need. It'll even refactor your code for you. And I mentioned Jeff because as Jeff would say, that's not faster. That's different. Faster is not just faster. It's different when it gets really faster. And the other thing is, as we talk a lot about in the Amplio University or the ACE program, the curriculum of that is about systems thinking. Systems thinking is about looking at systems more as the relationships and agreements between components. And I realized if you have an existing system that everybody's known about forever, but you come up with a new relationship in the system, a new way to speak about it. You hadn't noticed that connection before. That's new. I don't care that the pieces are the same. The relationship between the things. And I think that's why a lot of Amplio is unique and new. It's because I'm good at integrating things. Okay, so enough for the preamble, a little longer than I meant. That's really great, Tony. Bad guy, bad Gutenberg. What were you thinking? Okay, so questions. Keep this in the background. I'll slide this over here. Oh, and I'll give you a point. I'll give you a link to this. I've given this before, but I'll put this in the chat. This is my master list of, here where I talk about problems and here where I talk about disempowering beliefs. So if you don't have a problem you can think of, you can look here and see what you want to talk about. And while you're thinking, I'll be making this a little more important. I mean, a little better.
I have it's not a question, but it's just
Oh, sure.
an observation or a comment. I
Right.
was in a Zoom meeting last night, and somebody in the meeting found out that I had some background in IT, information technology, and she said, "Oh, I want to know more about AI. I hear all these things about it. Can you direct me to some for beginners?" And I was thinking about her question, and I said, "Well, of course, I can get you started on that path." And I had the oddest thought, and I suppose maybe it's complimentary to you, but I'm not trying to flatter you. I actually thought, yes, I can do that, but you should also check out the Amplio community because, in a sense, and maybe it's just me, maybe I've been around AI too much, or I've uh, been around you too much.
Some people have said that.
But I think what you're doing is, I mean, there may be apples and oranges, but what you're doing is really important. And I think it sets an environment that if one wanted to look into AI more, I think it might benefit them if they knew about your practices and your methodologies and your approach to things.
Well, I
I think it
appreciate
would make a better context for especially for those who are not familiar with AI. And
Yeah,
just a weird thought that just thought I'd share that with you.
no, I appreciate it. I appreciate the compliment and the confidence, but I also think, maybe having a session on AI and maybe bringing a couple of people in who are more expert. I don't consider myself an expert on AI.
Nor do I. Nor do I.
Yeah, but of course, I started studying AI back when I was in high school, literally in '69. I remember reading Pat Winston's book, MIT Lab. But as one of the most brilliant people I ever worked with in when I was temporarily assigned to IBM Research for a project. This guy was brilliant. I was the grunt Fortran programmer, so I don't mean to make it, oh wow, I was at IBM Research. No, I was just there to help this guy. Uh, but he would mention never has so much money gone into one group with so little to return, and that was the MIT AI lab. And when I got accepted to the MIT lab, the AI lab, I mean to MIT, it had a condition. I was not allowed to go to that lab. I had a fellowship, so I can go anywhere I want to. They say you can go to any school but this division in MIT's double E department, which was fine by me. I'd blown the interview with those guys because I said I was interested in pattern recognition and AI, which are two different things. I knew it was two different things, but they weren't any interested. See, I was just interested in how computers could be useful. AI is one way, pattern recognition is another. It's different. But what I do know is people, and I do know when you have a promise of something like AI, it's going to get misused because that's what people do. And I'm not Hey, I'm a person. I do this too. When I talk about how people mess up, I don't mean to imply I don't. I had joked a lot about how I was an expert programmer and in design. And I mean, I was one of these really amazing developers. But I didn't learn by watching other people make mistakes and avoid them. I learned by watching my mistakes and sometimes taking years to get past them. I plateaued a lot. I was always fast, but I plateaued a lot when I just got stuck in my manner. So I'm rambling, but for a reason here, Tony. There's something when I was talking to actually it was Tom Gill. I talk to him every week. The guy's amazing. When you talk to really, really brilliant people who have expertise that you don't have, it's good. Now, Tom, we actually are kind of consider ourselves, I guess, peers now. We've known each other, I don't know, 3 years, and we must have talked 150 times, 200 times maybe over that period, and we're deep friends as well. Uh, the thing is, we've each made ourselves stronger. I've learned a lot from him, and one of the things Tom does is he's really precise. In fact, he's irritatingly precise. I mean, aggravatingly precise. You want to hang up the phone on him sometimes. It's so precise, but I never do, and I just breathe deep when I get irritated. I won't say I don't. It's like, oh my God, I want to talk about this. And you're worrying about where the eye is above the dot is above the eye. Actually, it's not that bad. But he's always right to be precise. I know this. The fact that it's irritating doesn't mean it's any less valuable. It just means it's irritating. That talks about me. See, when you say somebody's irritating half the time, and maybe 90% of the time, that says more about you than it does about them. You got to be careful about that. Now, I know that, so I stick with it. And we had this deep chat about well, we had a deep chat about patterns and capabilities and things in my development book. But the other thing we talked about is I was talking to him about Amplio University, and I realized, and he's been coaching me for a year on this, and I finally started really listening a few months ago, that my target audience is not the people who are really struggling down in the weeds and having troubles and not necessarily even want to change, but are people like y'all who are coming and looking for a better way and taking action on it and recognizing you got to throw off the disempowering beliefs. So there's a group of people who kind of not only want to learn new stuff, but they want to learn how new stuff is created. Okay. And that's something we do more in Amplio University than we do in the ACOP. But part of what I'm trying to do is teach people how I do what I do, not to be like me, because that'd be ridiculous. I mean, some of you might learn to think like me, and that'd be a good thing for you. But my experience is we all have to learn to think in our way that's best for us. But I think that when people see how I put stuff together, that is a skill that I learned in college. That's what I learned in mathematics. Theoretical mathematics is my strongest background. I know that's where I connected it. And then in the 80s, when I took personal development workshops, I applied that from math into personal development. I can connect things, how people do things. So, and I had a psychology honors as well and all that. But there are, at the next level down are people, they may not want to think how to think in a sense, but they want to take the new practices. In other words, they may not, excuse me, not think how to think. They may not worry about how I created the things. They just want to know how to use these things I talk about. Like, how do you use first principles? So there's this level of how do you create things like first principles? How do you use things like first principles? And then how do you follow things like first principles? And that's more following practices. Now, in my mind, the vast majority of people are at that bottom level, and I'm not judging them. I don't judge people that way. Maybe for moments and maybe at times, but when I do, I'm full of shit. I'll just say it right there. I have no right or authority or anything about judging people that way. I won't say it doesn't cross my mind at times, but that's not a powerful place to come from. And usually when I notice I'm doing it, I take a deep breath because it changes the body energy, and I've got all sorts of funny meditations. A lot of these come from the East. Blowing roses is my favorite one, and I can't even find a reference for it. My life coach taught me it. It's where you actually literally create roses, and then you destroy them in your mind, and you create them and destroy them. Somehow it releases energy. Anyway, I don't know. It might be fun if people want, they'd have to make a request. I know a lot of little techniques that are really good energy thing. I've never taught them in a technical arena because it's more life coaching and I don't do life coaching directly anyway. But the point is, we have these three different ways of participating, and I think this is important to recognize. It's important to choose which you are, accept that, and then, I mean, accept that by allow it. Don't make yourself wrong, whichever one you're in. I mean, I come from a scientific community, so I kind of felt I was compelled to create. But the fact is, that came with so much negative energy. I'm not sure that was a good way to get there. I didn't do it by choice. I've had to throw off a lot of bullshit to now be here by choice. But I didn't get here by choice. I got here because I was in an incredibly competitive family with my dad a doctor, my brother a doctor, my other brother having an MIT PhD. You know, I joke I was a failure of the family. I only have 2 master's degrees. Oh, I'm so uneducated. Uh, so I got into this not in a good way, but now I'm in it by choice. But some people would just say, hey, look, just tell me what this stuff is you've learned and let me use it. Because in some ways, that's more efficient, especially if that's the way you like to think. And then the third one is like, just tell me how to get started. I want to follow. I'm fine. No, nobody will say that. Okay. I'm not saying you ask them where they want to be because they'll all want to be at the top level. They'll say they do because that's what sells, what looks good. But when you're coaching people, you better pay attention to who you're talking to. Because if you don't, you're going to be getting them pissed off. Because if you imply that they should be doing more than they are, then you're implying to them that they're not doing all they can be, and then they think they're selling them short, and now they're making themselves wrong, but they don't want to admit that, so you're the villain. So there's this weird dynamic people have, but you know what I'm talking about because I'm sure you've all done it at least once or twice in your life. So look for those rare cases. I speak about it easily because I do it all the time. Anyway, yeah, so I appreciate that, Tony. Yeah, and that is what I want to keep these three levels in play. It's good to know where you are and you make choices. Okay. Other questions or comments? Or looking for questions. Problems. So you have a problem you're trying to solve? This is the time to ask. So, Abizi, I see you came off mute, so I thought you were going to say something.
Yeah, well, if you can go back to that technology gap, the screen
Yeah, good. I'm
on
happy to talk about this. This is really powerful. This gives you a lot of
yeah.
guidance.
So what this is implying is that if we start using all of these other things you mentioned, the system thinking that we can close and we can become wealthy, because you also imply that this is about about wealth creation.
Yeah,
Is that the statement of what you are asserting
that's
to?
is exactly what I am saying. And this is
Because
one of
that's a
the,
very huge statement to say.
this is, this is why I did not retire. Because I looked, I mean, seriously, so I didn't retire. You know, my wife, when I quit the PMI 3 years ago now, and next month, said, "You sure you don't want to retire?" And I said no. And the reason is, at the time I wasn't totally clear, but one of the things I'm very clear about is that companies as a whole, on the whole, most companies operate at about 10 to 15% of their capacity. Now, why do I say this? Because I've seen how most companies operate. I go to conferences, I've gone to you know, the amount of waste, and they justify it with limiting beliefs. Like, oh yeah, we have to run experiments to see if this will make a difference. No, you don't. Expletive deleted. No, you don't. Or we don't know what the customer wants. In fact, I remember when I used to buy that, but then I remember times that no, I knew exactly what the customer wanted, but it takes an investment. It takes an investment, but the investment's worth it. You know, agile has become like go on a round the world cruise, but don't bother to pack. You'll figure it out as, oh, who knows what you're going to need. So just don't bring anything with you. And then you realize you have the wrong kind of money and your credit cards don't work out of country and you wonder why you're having troubles. All those stupid agilists, you know, whatever. You know, it's ridiculous. So I'm talking about going from 10 to 15% efficiency. Think about it. If you just got 5% more efficient, you 10 to 15 to 15 to 20. But I'm talking about 3 or 4 times more effective. Cutting out all this rework we do. It's definitely possible. And the things I put here in the middle is not a complete list. But one thing we need to do is get rid of this shit. These limiting beliefs kill us. We don't even think there's a possibility. But, you know, I see the lack of systems thinking defended. You know, most people don't even know what an MVI is. They'll say, oh, that's a sprint. That's a sprint increment. See, here's the problem. This is something you know. You got to fight against this all your life. It never goes away. It's called the human processing machine. When anybody tells you something, you will fit it into your view of the world as they tell it to you. You don't see it out there and then look at your view of the world and compare it. Rather, you see it through the lens of your world. And you don't notice you're doing that. You can step back and notice it, but most of the time we're on automatic and we don't even notice it. Now, the problem is our view of the world comes to us as if it is the world. We don't think it's our view of the world. It is the world. This is the world. I see it. And then you compare what they said to the world, and it doesn't match. You throw away what doesn't match. You look at conversations about flow inside people who are all for Scrum. They don't hear flow. I've given up trying to talk about this. They see flow within the iteration. No, that's not flow. You can't, I mean, it's like so difficult to break that because they're not willing to break this because, as Upton Sinclair says, it's hard for a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. What if Ken Schwaber woke up one morning and realized, oh my goodness, sprints and increments, they're wrong. And we shouldn't have a product owner. And we don't need scrum masters. We should give, I mean, imagine, I mean, it's not going to happen, but if it did happen, it'd go back to sleep probably and say, oh my God, let's hope I don't think that next time I wake up. Because it would devastate his entire business. Or what happens if, you know, Dave Snowden's company's called the Kinevin. What if you realize Kinevin wasn't the best way to do it? I mean, we lock ourselves into these approaches. So we have to break this. And if we add these things, see, here's the most amazing thing to me. I gotta say this. This event, not to you, not of you, but this is event. I will admit, because here's what's really interesting to me. And this is just human nature, and sometimes I don't accept it. And yes, this I'm judging. Okay, the bullshit you need a Zoom bullshit indicator. BS comes up above the head, and BS here, BS identified, or what does they call it? BS warning. I don't know. Well, here's a BS warning because I said I'm not supposed to judge it.
Detected
Yeah,
would be the,
BS detected. BS detected. Warning, warning. Okay, so here's one of the BS detected. I put these case studies out. These are real case studies. I did not make these up. Okay, these happened on the basis of systems thinking, value stream analysis, and understanding flow, basics of flow, delays, causaways. I mean, this all happened like 15 years ago. This was early. So with an investment of less than $20,000, they got a 63% increase. This all happened over a few days, 1.7 million. They actually said it was higher, but they didn't want to claim more because they would have it'd been political. Well, why were you losing that much money kind of attitude? So they, okay. For less than 10,000, I saved 25%, and this happened instantly. No, this is wrong. No, that's right, 20,000, right. This one, for $2,000, I gave them an insight that saved 20%. They were wasting 20% of their 100-person development team. Now, this isn't what's amazing that I did this. I've seen other people do stuff like this. What's amazing is I've almost never been asked how I did it. It's been denied that I could have done this, or people have told me, well, you weren't doing it the way you said you were doing it. But when you do something that's outside of the norm, people just don't, it's like they want to almost deny it happened because they're not outside the norm. It's why, see, I don't like heroes because if you're causing yourself to be a hero, believe me, I've done that any number of times. I used to do that in the 80s all the time. I was, entrepreneurs in Ichak Adiza's model of management. He says, if all you are is an entrepreneur, he calls it an arsonist, because you start the fires that you then put out. Arsonists are really good firemen. They have to be, because they keep putting out fire. They keep starting fires, and then they're really good at putting them out. And then when they hire people, they're dismayed that these people don't know how to put out the fires they're starting. This is kind of becoming what you say, being aware. But now when you know this, you can do something about it. But here's the thing. There's been more defense that this couldn't happen than asking me why it happened. Now, this is what I talk about I don't talk about these case studies as much. Some of them I mentioned, but mostly we're talking about what they are. And yes, you do this, you can do amazing things if a company's majorly fucked up. Excuse my language on that one. But here's the thing. Here's the other interesting thing. Who led these? In every case, it was led by management. In fact, in this one, no developer was present. In this one, no developer was present. Actually, now I think about it, these are all the managers. We just decided what to do, and then we trained the developers on what to do. You could say imposed an iterative process on them. We didn't ask them what they wanted to do. We told them, here's what we're going to do. I didn't tell them what to do. Their managers figured out. Their managers were on their side. Managers are on your side most of the time, except when you treat them with disrespect. Then expect them to not be on your side. Okay. This was, again, I remember this. This was, again, I was talking to all the dev managers. No developer was there as far as I remember. Yeah. So that's weird. Wait a moment, Al. You got all these savings without talking to the teams? Yes. In fact, I have others I could put up here. It wasn't the team doing it. It was management getting a hold of what's doing, then setting up the development environment to make the team work better. This is what's called lean. You get a lot of interesting things when you study lean. You know what the hardest thing it is for people when they join Toyota to work? I don't know if this is true now, but it certainly was true 20 years ago when I was studying them. Well, I've been studying them since. It's to get them to make suggestions. They're not used to it. I went through the lean indoctrination videos, what they do, and they want to go on the manufacturing line and be told how to do their job. They're given some basic instructions, but they're not allowed to just do their job. If they don't make suggestions, they're told they're underperforming. And it's a culture shift. And it's not necessarily because they had a job where managers beat them up. It's because they almost certainly had parents. There are some orphans out there in the world. but they probably had it worse. I'm just going to talk about the easy case with the parents. How many of you have grown up with parents who never told you what to do? In fact, how many of you ever had the case of where when you did something out of the norm, the parent said, oh, that's good. I'm glad you're trying. The fact that you broke a dozen eggs is okay because it was good that you're experiencing. I've never had that experience myself. I'm in amazement at the mother of Maria Rilke. I'm not sure I'm getting his full name. Rainier Maria Rilke is one of my favorite poets. So I was reading a little bit about I love his poetry, but I was reading about his growth. And one day when he was little, he said, Mama, angels talk to me. Now, I would not have even imagined what his mom said, but she said, well, honey, you get a journal and write down what they tell you. I mean, isn't that amazing? I haven't had that experience in my life. Oh, maybe with my wife a few times, but this is an adult. The problem is all my childhood imprint is already there. Anyway, I'm on a kind of weird mood today, I guess, but I think this is useful stuff. I mean, I'm being self-reflective. When you start recognizing this, and it's easy to put it out on other people, but you got to notice, hey, you're a person. You do this too. All people do this. Some people have better ways of not getting reactivated. Okay, so I'm going to wait. Yeah, so good question. Yes, I am suggesting that if you do these things, I'm actually going to write a post about this, not this per se, but something like this. I am tired of hearing people say agile is a mindset. And anytime somebody fails, oh, they didn't have the agile mindset. And I'm saying, no. That's like saying, honey, I love you. My mindset is I love you. Ignore the fact that I sleep with other women. That's just the doing. Don't worry about it. That's doing. That's called an agile marriage. I'm sorry about that, but it's a mindset. Yes. It's also doing. As one of my coaches once said, Frank Sinatra had it right. It's doobie 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 doo. Agile is a mindset and you still have to do stuff. And if you just do, that's not good. And it just mindset, that's not good. And people use agile as a mindset and then say, oh, well, they weren't true agilists. But see, you can say that anytime anything fails. These things, so you could say, well, what's the agile mindset in my mind? I don't like the agile mindset personally. I don't like the 4 values and the 12 principles and think that's going to guide you and all that. There's some good ideas there, yes. But if I'm going to go with a mindset, I'll go with the physics of flow and human-centered development. I should have human-centered development up here. Most people ignore human. Saying things like follow until you understand is not attending to people. People don't like to follow. That's giving kid teaching to adults. They dislike that. They resist that. It's very bad. But yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. And I'll admit the problem in the Amplio University is not the problem. We got plenty. But what took me a while to get off of is that I have focused a lot on the thinking and that. And now in the last 6 months, we've been focusing a lot more on the doing. And that's why I'm now creating the curriculum path. So there'll be I'm real excited. I'm real excited about taking, very excited about taking this. Combining the Amplio GPS and the Amplio system where we have all these slides. I mean, I built the DAVSC and Ibizi. In fact, I might help you ask for help a little bit on this to make sure that when I finish the curriculum, that everything you learned in DAVSC is in here. Because my intention is, but I'm not copying that workshop. Okay, I didn't take the slides and try to copy it. I'm trying to take the thoughts. But we have all sorts of things here. And, and we go through some of it needs to be updated, but what I'm wanting to do next is create the curriculum for what I call Amplio at scale, which is something surpassing the AVSC and smaller than safe and more effective. So then we could actually have more of the doing. I have focused a lot on the being scientific and all that. But the beauty is if you do get these and you are scientific about this, then you can impact wherever you are. And that's what's really powerful. is that this stuff lets you think for yourself and figure things out. The problem is people still want to be given an answer. So this is why Amplio itself is not just this stuff here, but is a set of capabilities I've talked about. Hang on. Well, here, I can pull it up this way. I have it in the book, but it's also, these are why I am changing the terms, as we talked about yesterday, from patterns to capabilities. But this is why I've created this list. These are the patterns. And if you want to go from here to here, some of the things are minimum valuable increments, something to do, value stream analysis, something to do, test first, diagnosis, these are things to do. I put them in this order because these happened at the start of Agile. All the stuff was there. People just ignored it. Later, I discovered these things when I got into Ellie Goldratt. That actually is kind of interesting, though. I'm sorry, I'm just rambling here, but how you go from here to here is what I'm trying to document in this. Here are problems. Here's the solution. Here's the benefits. Here are the causes. Now you can look at this any number of ways. You could, except I don't think you can change these. I can't. You can say, here's the problem, here's the cause, and go this way. Or you can say, well, what am I supposed to learn? You could go that way. These are all interrelated. But this is only half the story. The other half of the story are these belief systems that keep us, they don't just keep us locked down. They cause problems. See, that's what's so bad about them. It's like having an ankle bracelet that keeps you attached to some place, but it's also has sharp edges on it. So it not only stops you from moving, it hurts you while you try to move. These are double deadly. They don't just keep you stuck. They cause problems they literally cause problems, not just stop you from solving problems. That's actually an insight I just got here. So I'm going to write that down. Here, just double click here. Disempowering beliefs don't just stop you from solving problems. They cause problems on their own. And when you talk to people about them, you talk to the people who are promoting them, they say you're being negative. And I say, no, I'm trying to create an opportunity to get rid of these. So yeah, Amplio is driven to close the gap. Maybe too much, because sometimes they don't teach the basic stuff, figuring people know this. That's why I keep asking y'all to ask me questions. Okay, long answer, but I'm done for the moment. Other questions? That was a good question, Avizi.
The capabilities, are they in the Dropbox?
Yeah, the capabilities, here's where the capabilities are listed, actually. There are two places, and I've got to integrate them still a little bit. One, and by the way, those of you who aren't in Amplio University, Dropboxes, we have a folder rather, where there's things they can get. So this thing called the Amplio patterns is in Dropbox. And there is the list here that we started with. Remember how this also, and I've been changing these a little bit, but I'll actually explain this because this is fits yesterday's. But here. So the reason I'm changing, well, I don't mind having the word patterns here. We still have capabilities and patterns. The master list, hang on. Let's relate this. See, this is an example. It's a complex system, but when I get it all smooth, I admit it has some rough edges still. It's not hard to use. It's a little awkward now. So if you recall, the big picture I use is this one where we have different views of, the stakeholders, budgeting, strategy, product, and all that. And see, we color coded them here. So here I call them patterns, but I actually should change that and call these capabilities, because capabilities, remember now, is what you're able to do. So you have to know how to do agile budgeting. You have to know how to do full kit allocation. But how you do these, what's the means for the capability, could be direct, but I think there'll always be at least one pattern. But see, here's the issue with the way I had been talking about it, is I had been talking about it as a pattern language, which nobody really knows. We talked about that yesterday, I guess in the afternoon, when it's easy to say a set of capabilities. Like, look, if you can do all these things, you're in good shape. This is a set of capabilities you need. And then some of these capabilities have a single pattern because they're pretty straightforward. And some of these, like planning, planning has several patterns depending upon your context. I have a team planning, I have a team sprint planning, I have a team sprint planning, I have a team flow planning. I then have a few multiple teams planning. I have a small scale planning, large scale planning. The reason is patterns are solutions to problems in a context. The contexts are so different. In some cases, you need different patterns. It's the same way Chris Alexander, who has a porch pattern, also has a veranda pattern, also has a foyer pattern, how you walk in. They're all about going from the outside to the inside. And some of them actually stay somewhat outside. There are enclosed foyers. You go to old cities, where the houses are not 50 years old, but 100 years old. Okay, I lived in one of these guys when I was in Cambridge. A lot of old houses here. It's really interesting to see how, in fact, a lot of the new houses mimic the old houses because people think it looks good. Oh, that's in New England, whatever. So you see a lot of things in houses that are really bizarre. But except when they come from to look like something 200 years ago because we think that's cute. But functionally, it has no value whatsoever. And I notice this because I like architecture. I pay attention to it. And I'm not saying it's bad. It makes you feel comfortable. That's why a lot of apartments that don't do this, they're just blocks, cubes. They don't feel good. Anyway, so these are actually capabilities, even though I'm calling them patterns because I'm changing it. And then some of these will have multiple patterns to implement them to provide the means for them. And what I was about to say before, when I would set me off looking at the curriculum I build, so this is something else. I've said this before. Hang on. See, this is the interesting thing. All this stuff ties together, and it ties together in so many different ways that can be overwhelming. And so don't worry about that. You may or may not see all these connections. But let me ask you, instead of me telling you, I have talked about how to create training curriculum in a certain way. I'm not going to give the name. But can you see that maybe I can use that to go from here to here? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Maybe you don't. That's a failure on my part, not yours. How would you go from here to here? What would your path be? Taking what Abizi said. If I'm here, if I'm on this line and I want to get them to up there, how would I figure out how to go from here to there?
When the capabilities they suffice, if
Yeah, but
you
that's a lot of capabilities. So are you going to give them a week
yeah,
course? Okay, no, so that's good. The capabilities will suffice. Yes. So now you know what you want to teach them, but how do you teach it to them?
because I know we have slides for most of this, and
Yeah,
then we
we
have
have slides for
recordings.
most of these. Yeah, no, I'm forcing you to connect the dots in some ways, and I appreciate you're struggling with it. Nobody else is saying the answer, so don't worry, they're struggling too. You're just on speaker. So you got all these things. So they're here, and you wanted to get there, and you even know the stuff they need, but it's just this big pile of stuff that would overwhelm them. So what do you want to, what's the path? First of all, notice it's a path. It's not a 4-day workshop. It's a path. So
Isn't this where you use the GPS as the diagnostic tool to figure out what is their biggest impediment that's preventing them from getting to what's possible, and then do it in a prioritized fashion, piece by piece?
yeah, because when I say what's the path, that's a lie. There isn't the path. There are any number of paths. And Andrew just said how you decide what your path is. So now you know which of the capabilities. I wasn't doing that intentionally. See, I fall into the crappy way of thinking myself all the time because I was on step 2 already. But he's right. That's step 1. What's the smaller pile that will make the bigger difference? So now you have a smaller pile that'll make a difference. Now, by the way, the reason I admit this stuff, I just want to be really clear. I'm not trying to be modest, although it helps. What I'm trying to say is I do this too. You do this too. You have to notice when you jump over things, say, oh, I jumped over something. So maybe next time you don't jump over it so much. So maybe next time you don't give people a little too much of a push. So that's why that's a coaching tip I just embedded. Okay. So now we have this big pile, like you noticed, BZ, that we want to do. Now there's this smaller pile of more important stuff. We might get the whole big pile, but the smaller pile that's more important. So how do you decide what to teach somebody when there's this smaller pile of things? What do you look at? Just use how you're doing it now. Don't look for the right answer. Yeah, Susan.
Yeah. Whichever one of those things that are identified as problems, which one is likely to impact the other ones most? The not having an intake process, for example, impacts a whole lot of things. So maybe you go there first.
Yeah, that's one factor for sure.
Yeah, and there should be a collaboration with this person where you know and to know where their problems are. So you want to have that engagement to identify. Yeah, so you are not coming from your perspective; you are coming from their
Right.
That's right.
perspective.
That's a big one. So from their perspective, keep going.
And then you also need to figure out what they already know and what they've tried and not been able to do, so that you can figure out how to help them and connect with them as quickly to give them results so that they believe in the process.
Yeah, because this is what I mean by human-centered development. Because if you don't do that, you're messing it up right from the beginning.
Yes.
And yet this is ignored. I mean, isn't that amazing? That's ignored. And then the people who don't use that blame the people for the way they react. It's insane. It's worse than insane. Anyway, so I'm in judgment. The BS detector. If I put judgment on the people doing it, if I just say that's what's happening, it's an observation. It's the judgment that's BS, not the observation. Okay, so there's another thing here because we're running out of time. So what impacts are most important? By the way, this better than low hanging fruit, which I hear all the
Yes.
time. I hear this all the time. No, where does that come from? It seems easy, but it's wrong. See, Scrum is the low hanging fruit to Agile, but it sets up all sorts of other problems. So you want to see what impacts are most important. What thing has impact on others? It's very important. You're coming from their perspective, attend to where they are. Does it make sense? Yeah, I'm sorry.
I suspect part of what the low hanging fruit is the public companies who have to do quarterly results. So they want to show something,
Yeah, there's a lot.
faster rather than
That's right.
slower. And they don't care about the long term so much.
Now, what happens if one concept depends on another concept? Is that important?
You have to,
Yeah.
yeah, the pick up sticks model. You take it
Yeah.
from the top to unravel what is beneath.
That's right. So what I like about this, I'm so glad I've come up with this because this really did impact me. So there are two things that impacted me a lot. So from 1980, 81 to about I don't know, from 81 to about 96, I had a series of modestly successful, like 3 or 4 or 5 companies, software companies. And I remember somebody saying, "Oh, wow, you must have been a really great entrepreneur, all this success." And I would always say to myself, and sometimes I'd say to them, if I was really successful, I'd have had 1 company. But I kept starting something and the way I was doing didn't work. And it's like, oh my God, I wasn't failing and I was creating amazing stuff, but I wasn't, what I'd say, successful in business. And then when I formed Net Objectives, there were 2 things I swore that I would build it on. And I've been good about it. And it was a shift. I'm not saying I was unethical. I was not unethical. I was very ethical during all this period. But I was always trying to look at how to make money, which seems reasonable. Okay. With ethics. But there's a difference in trying to make money from a client and trying to do the best you can for a client and trust money comes back from it. Those are 2 different attitudes. And I learned this from Earl Nightingale. He's been called the father of the personal development group. And he's got a very interesting story. Talk about how much brilliance has been killed and we don't even know about it. He was on the Arizona. That's the battleship. There were something like only half a dozen survivors at Pearl Harbor. The whole thing blew up. The magazine, I mean, and he was on the crow's nest, way up at the top. That's why he survived, because the blast killed most of the people, and then the shock and drowning killed a lot of the rest. But he said something that seriously impacted me, which is that money is a measure of the value you're giving people. Now, it's not totally true, because drug dealers make a lot of money. So you could say perceived value, but I know he meant it in ethics. He also said success is a man striving toward a worthwhile goal. So when I formed Net Objectives in 99, what I knew I had been doing all the time before that was ethically building products and then trying to sell them, instead of finding what customers truly need. And I looked at what people needed, but always coming from service and trusting that the money would come. And I remember in the early days of Net Objectives, this was not easy for me. There were times like some people wanted to pay me stuff that I knew wasn't really in their best interest, and I would walk away from it. And it was hard when you're, when you're on, I started with $14,000 in the bank when I started Net Objectives, and I'd had failed enterprises before. I told my wife, and she was nervous, to be candid. But she's a great supporter. I said, look, honey, when this 14,000 is gone, I will get a job. This was like in the 90s, so getting a job wasn't hard. And I remember every month it was going down a little bit. It got to about 6,000, then it started going up, so I know it's successful. But I remember times that I would walk away, or I wouldn't take payment for something that was offered. And I remember when I did it, I was like, oh my God, Al, you're crazy. But no, that's how you defeat the voice in your head, is you make a commitment and you stick to what you said. Okay. And the voice passes, hopefully. And if it doesn't, then you got to look at another issue. But the other one was this technology gap. See, here's the thing. When I mentioned Bush and the ocean thing, here's the thought that crossed my mind. Not having enough money is a perspective. If it's trillions of dollars we're losing, what does $1 trillion mean? I mean, if we can bring in 50 to 100 trillion more dollars by doing things well, then things like the ocean problem goes away. Things like maybe energy costs being a little higher go away. It's such a limiting mindset. I'm not saying you spend money you don't have. I'm not saying that at all. And I'm not getting into the politics of spending money, but I'm just saying it's a limiting mindset to say we can't do this. No, you've got to focus not on being stuck down here and doing better here. You've got to focus on coming up to this. And this is what's been driving me, literally. I wrote about this when I formed Net Objectives. This is one of the first things I put on my website, was the technology gap and what I'm doing. And what I'm doing now, and I state this, I believe that the 2 biggest impediments we have is the lack of these systems thinking, and the high cost of education. I'm not saying education is always bad. I'm not saying when you get a group of people and kick them off to do something, get them, that's fine. That's not expensive. You know, $4 or $5, $6,000 a day, that's okay, because you need them together, and that's expensive to deliver. And it's useful. And like that, you know, some of the courses I did, we charged $4, $5, $6,000 a day, and it made a huge impact. But we always worked as a group, and we had them do something. But for ongoing adult education, ridiculous. This is why I pegged Amplia University at $1,000 for 6 months. That's 90% less than what normal training would cost. Live training, not online training. And I give you all a taste in the COP for free. I don't know. Part of it's marketing. Part of it is I just like to talk, and part of it is I like to make people better or help people guide their own life. So I get some back that way. But it's also more effective because learning over little bits. See, I'm going to give one last thing and then we're past time. Or I don't mind if you got another question. I'm going to say the last thing I want to say. And then I'm still happy to think another question. There's an opportunity with how I'm shifting the ACOP a little bit and putting more materials out there. And believe me, there's more and more material out there. I mean, there's days worth of stuff out on our YouTubes now. And you get there from the website, successengineering.works, go to resources, YouTube playlists, go to foundations first, but then look around other things. In fact, maybe I'll show you that now when I say this last thing. Give you a quick review of what's here, YouTube playlist. And there's a lot of stuff on Tom Gilb's stuff. So the foundations is where I'd start, okay? And you don't have to do all of it, but I would do it up to this point, okay? These are older ones. You can see how it shifts. I've redone all these up to here. So you've got about 5 or 6 hours there. But I'm going to tell you how to do it. Then we talk about some collaboration boards, the COP, some of the better ones I put here. The mini lessons, I've only got 2, but I'll be adding more. And you could just look through this. But there's what's called flipped classroom learning. Okay. What flipped classroom learning is, you can study between now and next Tuesday and then come to me with questions. Be more aggressive in what you want to learn. Use this workshop that way. And I invite you to do that. We do a little bit of this in the Amplia University, the paid for tracks, but not much. I'm going to be doing more. Okay, so if you got questions, I'll hang. Otherwise, we'll be done in a minute. No questions. I'll wait a minute.
It's not a question, but it's just one thing I want to add and reinforce to something you said about the curve. When you're talking about, you know, the value of doing these things, one thing that I've found useful when I'm talking to people now is to talk about it in terms of the opportunity cost. So if it's costing you something today to not do anything different. And like in my world, which is focused mostly on security, the average delay for projects is 8 to 12 weeks for large global organizations due to security. And if you kind of map this out in some average numbers for a project like a CRM deployment that's supposed to add 10% of your annual revenue, normal target, then that's about $1 billion. If you take the 8-week hit that you lose in the benefit of that project because you delayed it for 8 weeks. Now, you are going to pay that. You're going to eat that cost no matter what. So if you spend 50K, 100K, whatever the hell it is, there's a really easy way to justify that because you've already lost that money. You have pissed it away by doing nothing. So if you are in conversations where it's, oh, well, we don't have the budget or we don't have the money, it's back to the perception thing that Al mentioned. It's not that you don't have it. You have already committed to spending it, but you can commit to spending it in a smarter way and then need to spend or lose less of it. And I've found that pretty powerful.
Yeah,
So
you know, I'm glad you throw this in. This is a good background. So somehow, and I'm not saying this is what you said, it's not. I want to, that's what I want to explore in a minute or two. In a sense, the opportunity costs and the benefits are related because you're saying that you're not going to have to be paying attention to this. And yet that's different from here. So it seems like opportunity cost is actually different from any of these to some level, but related to problems and benefits. But is it worth a separate column? It might be.
Yeah, I mean, it takes specific, the problem with it is that they're only effective if you make them specific. So you
Yeah.
need some ways to make them specific. So if you can, like, I mean, and I got here, because I always used to talk about opportunity costs before I really started digging into the cost of delay stuff from Reinertsen. But so if you can identify specific delay implications of a particular problem,
Yeah.
then you have the basis for the math,
Yeah.
because then you can just plug in the numbers.
Yeah. I'm going to consider that. I think that's actually another angle. Even if it's repeating it, it's saying it at a different angle and lets you see what's going on.
Because I mean, realistically, you know, like for the types of engagements that I do, if you look at them in isolation, they're generally big compared to others, you know, budget items that would be evaluated. But if you can look at it and say, look, if I can shave 5 days off of one project, I have covered this engagement. And that's one project. And then it's
Yeah.
exponentially beneficial because it goes away and
Yeah.
you don't have to have this over time.
Then it's ongoing. So yeah, and in fact, that's the kind of thing I believe you can do. The payback. See, this is one of these other disempowering beliefs is that it takes oh so long. No, it doesn't. You know, again, people look to defend where they are. I have said any number of times that my first Scrum training took me an hour with no follow-up coaching, and they were successful. Not once has anybody asked me, how did I do that? Why did that work there? I know very well why it worked there. It worked well there because they were a classic case of the new product development game. They had all the pieces that they say you need for the new product development game to work or to put into place that Scrum ignores, by the way. And this lack of questioning is just remarkable to me. So I don't know. I might get more obnoxious in the near future as I'm seeing this, because or blunt or in people's face. Yeah, I'm sorry, Bill. Did you have something? You're on mute. It looks like you're talking, but you're on mute, Bill.
Sorry, it really comes down to cost of delay. They acknowledge that there is a problem. This is what it's costing me. You demonstrate, if you go back to that original image that you had where it showed the levels as you're going to mature into
This
with
thing,
technology. Yeah, the original one. It all plays together. So whether it is that there's a reason they're there. There you go, right? So how do we move up from what's possible was to manifest it? Well, in the
Well-
conversation with them, they're going to acknowledge the areas where just them understand and take it almost like a storytelling to them. Get there
Yes.
on their own. Then you bring up, well, you know, oh well, this is how I do it. I apply systems thinking. And they get a little more interested in that. Bottom line to that, then they have a reason they were there. They got a problem,
Right.
whether they want to admit it or
Well, this is part of the GPS and Amplio that we do.
Yeah.
Is we talk to them, they see it,
Exactly.
we create an improvement backlog so they can
and
start.
ultimately they may not buy it because there may be many reasons to whatever
Oh
biases they
no,
have,
it's not. See,
lens,
that's something
etc.
we're not selling them anything. They build it with us.
Yeah.
That's the tool. We co-build this. We collaboratively discover this. So they sell themselves. I had an interesting observation.
Bingo.
They sell
Bingo.
themselves. What voice is a person's favorite voice?
There's
Theirs, typically, right? That's one reason you ask questions, because then they get to hear themselves talk, which they love. And if you ask good questions, they'll say things they hadn't realized before, and they'll think, oh man, I am so smart. That was just brilliant.
Yeah, it's a little secret. Use their name when you talk to them.
Yeah.
Well, Al, well, Joe, well, Bill.
Yeah, they love it. Their
Well,
favorite
they
word is
love
their
it.
name,
But
and they,
hear
I
their
mean,
name.
seriously, I mean, it seems silly, but there are lots of reasons to ask questions, but human-centered development also tells us then they get to hear themselves show how smart they are, as opposed to you trying to get them to understand how smart you are. And that's why I hate to follow till you understand, because who knows, and we've been subjected to that, from kindergarten through usually a couple of years in college. Some colleges do it all along. I left, Emory, one of the things I liked at Emory was I could find places where I could think. And I remember still had some classes where they wanted to tell me what to think. I didn't like those classes. Uh, but that's one advantage liberal arts schools have sometimes, is they're more about you thinking than learning and stuffing your brain with stuff they think is better for you. Anyway, I mean, I'm a believer. I got a lot of advanced technical degrees. I believe in them too, but it's a question of how you teach. Okay.
There's
Interesting
one
day.
more thing I want to add
Yeah,
to
that's
that.
okay. I love this follow-on conversation. I think this has really been interesting.
In the cost of delay conversation, another thing that I have observed is that most people focus on the cost of delay from a delivery team expense perspective, and
Yeah.
they don't actually do it from a business
Yeah.
perspective, because the
Yes.
team actually has no idea what the intended financial impact of what
That
they're
is so
working on
right.
is to do. So one of the things that I've found very useful is to insist, when I have the people that I work with engage, is to actually figure this out, whether, it's supposed to save $5 million because we're automating a process or whatever it is. And I mean, I'm having my security architects do this because we're engaging as early as we can, and the business architects, and I mean, nobody knew. They never asked these questions. They never knew. It's like, this is the features we've got to deliver. Let's deliver it. And so it's really about instilling an interest or a curiosity as to fundamentally, why are we doing this? And not just from because somebody told us to, but like, what is the business expecting at the end of the day from
That's right.
what we are doing now? Because if you don't contextualize what you're doing in those conversations, everything else is just meaningless.
Yeah. So I do have to add something to this. I need to add this into our curriculum. So there was a case study we had that we would talk about when we talked about MBIs and stuff. Well, then we called them MBIs, but so we were at a client and they wanted us to help write a support system for the support people. And there were about 20 plus 22 things that would require human intervention. For what they were doing is, this was a financial company, not Fidelity, but a company like Fidelity. So their problem was, there were cases where there was like I think the problem was he had this like corporate, for a company, they had a way of setting up individual employees' financial systems for them. And sometimes they run into issues. And there were like 22 cases that they were always doing manually. And the feeling was the system could be made better to make it, so they wouldn't have them all. Okay. So when they did an analysis of this, what they realized was something like half of the cases handled almost everything. And so there was this meeting one of our consultants was in with their IT and the IT architect, I think it was, and the business person who was wanting this done. And he was saying, he was asking, our consultant was saying, well, why don't we do these first? So they wanted to know what that would be. And the IT person said, you can't do that. And our consultant said, well, of course we can. I said, no, you can't. I says, well, why can't you? Well, because if we do that and then we do the others later, it's going to cost a day in changing the database, or some time to change the database, because now we'll have to have a different database than we have. Oh, so you can do it. You're just saying it'll create some extra work. And I said, okay, that was a new concept for these guys. It reflects exactly what you were saying, Andrew. All they were looking at is what it would take them. So they said, well, give us an estimate. So, well, he can't give us an estimate because it's not the thing to do. And then he forced them. He basically said, you give us an estimate. Imagine this happens and you tell us what it'll cost. They figure, we'll take an extra month. I go, okay, good. So what we have is, instead of the whole project will take us 6 months, and if we do it in stages, like 3 months and then 3 months, it might end up, end up taking us 7 months. So you're saying you're going to delay the project for 3 months to save 1 month. He says, well, yeah, because it makes a lot of sense to him. So then the question was, well, the business side, but see, this is the cost of delay. We're delaying the value we'd get in 3 months. Well, the delay in the value of 3 months was huge. I mean, 80% of the value of the whole project was in those things they had. And guess what? They implemented those. They never did implement the others. Why? Because it really didn't make any difference to implement. But this is this whole thinking. So I see people defending the Agile Manifesto when I say it's team centric, because I counted, in fact, somebody posted this recently. I once said there's 17 references to team. Yeah, they don't use the word team, but it's clear what they're talking about. They're talking about the team. They're talking about the developers. So that's the team. But the point is, it doesn't matter how many times you reference it. What point is where's your focus? Agile almost doesn't focus on the most important stuff, which is business value, and the people are determining how to get it. Limiting belief here. The manifesto, when you hold it as the truth and as sufficient, is one of the biggest ones out there. People can't handle that. Some people can't handle that. Okay, good session. I really like this. This is next week. I do have a little bit of an agenda, but not much. Next week, I'm going to go through these tables, and then you can chime in, because I think I need to order them more, and I think going through them with you will be good. And I'll consider this about opportunity cost as a new column, because I think it's different. I think it is different. I think it's a different way to say maybe the same thing. But you do sometimes, I don't want to say spoon feed, because that sounds like we're belittling them, but sometimes you have to put it in their perspective. Always put it in their perspective. Okay, any other closing statements? Are we good? Okay, great for the questions. Yeah, this was really good. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks.
Welcome.